welcome to the Ne Jia Chuan podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, Qigong, and meditation. This week we continue our discussion of the Yang style Tai Chi with another one of Yang Cheng Fu's students, Chen Ming. Chen Ming is a prolific author in Tai Chi, so we go into his background, look at a couple of his different books, and primarily take from his book Tai Chi Da Wen, Tai Chi Questions and Answers, and look at some of the things that come up in there, including using force. In the Patreon extended episode, we go into a lot more about kicking, and they also in terms of practicing just the form or just push hands or a combination of the two. Then we return to the Tai Chi classics. It's a short one that just has to do with the transmission of Tai Chi from teacher to student. So we take a look at that. And then this week's Patreon, we continue our discussion of internal alchemy and Taoist meditation from Wang Mu's book. Check out the Patreon for the extended episode as well as a bonus episode for each episode that comes out. So I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves and be well.
In today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about Yang style Tai Chi and the life and times of the famous Tai Chi practitioner Chen Ming. So let's look at his book as translated on Brennan Translation. The Art of Tai Chi Boxing by Chen Ming. He says, I heard about Tai Chi boxing of the Wudong school when I was young, but I had not yet met anyone who knew the stuff. In 1915, I traveled to Hebei and got to meet Sun Ludong, and I learned Xingyi and Bagua from him. I heard my colleagues say that Mr. Yang of Guangping inherited Tai Chi, and so in the autumn of 1917, I visited Yang Luchan's grandson, Cheng Fu, meeting him informally, and I asked him, people say the Yang family Tai Chi is the best, but that you don't lightly teach it to people. Is that the case? Yang Cheng Fu smiled and said, it's not that I don't teach it to people. I teach it to people who want it. My grandfather received it from the Chen family of Hunan, and now it's about to be returned to a Chen. If you want it, I will not keep it from you. So that's nice. He recognized that Chen Ming is also a Chen.
Right.
Way back, somehow related.
Yep.
Part of Chen Ming's work is the Tai Chi Chuan Da Wen, the questions and answers on Tai Chi Chuan that he wrote, translated by Benjamin Lowe and Robert W. Smith. Chen Ming writes an introduction that gives us some information. So he says, I studied Tai Chi Chuan for 8 years with Yang Cheng Fu. Because I was not overly bright, whenever I had doubts, I asked him many questions, which he answered and in great detail. Once during this period, he visited the South, and I studied under Yang Xiaoho for 3 months, and was able to learn something from him. In 1925, I came to Shanghai and founded the Qizhou Tai Chi Chuan School. When I began teaching, few even knew the name, but within 4 years, Tai Chi had become very popular. Those who wanted to study the martial arts studied Tai Chi. And those who wanted to teach the martial arts taught Tai Chi. Some say that I was the first person to bring Tai Chi to the South, perhaps, but I cannot say for sure. Tai Chi strengthens our people and country. But if it becomes a fad, divorced from the original spirit, or spreads everywhere forgetting its principles, or if it is mixed with other things, thus losing an important part of its essence, then it becomes only a matter for concern. So I have taken what I learned from Professor Yang and put into a book for those interested in Tai Chi. He talks about Yang Cheng Fu a little bit, and he says, look, this book is Yang Cheng Fu's statements to me. You know, these are questions people gave me, but they're really the questions that I asked Yang Cheng Fu, and he told me the answers, so I wrote it down here as Q&A. So the very first issue he brings up, he says, I heard Tai Chi once was practiced as single postures, but I don't know when it was connected into a series. I think it was probably the author of the Tai Chi Chuan Lun, who listed the postures sequentially by name, may have originated this. He deserves praise for this, for if he had not done so, Tai Chi probably would have disappeared. So that's interesting. There's the idea of Tai Chi as the 13 postures, which implies them being somewhat static in nature. But then there's the Tai Chi form is done in this flowing way, and so he theorizes it's Wang Songyue, who the Salt Shop author who wrote the Tai Chi Chuan Lun. So maybe he's the one who linked all the postures together.
What I've heard, one theory is that it went from static postures to 13 lines, essentially 13 techniques, right? So the that each one of the original 13 postures was a like a Xingyi line, that maybe not done in a straight line, but that you had a repetitive technique, right? And that you would do those. And then at
You do
some point,
single whip after single whip after
right.
single whip.
The way you do, like so there's a couple of them that they kept in the form, like brush knee, repulse monkey, fair ladies, these ones where you do the same move in a straight line over and over. And I think that's what originally the 13 was. And then when it went from that to what we now know as Tai Chi, which is this longer string of 108 movements, it
Yeah,
was that was putting in all the fighting applications.
makes sense. And then also he says it probably would have disappeared if he hadn't strung them together like that, which is probably true. It gives Tai Chi that unique long form that just serves as this sort of ground, serves as this bedrock for the art.
It's certainly part of its popularity. I mean, it's not just, some guy going over
Right.
and
It's
over.
not just a bunch of random, yeah. It's just there's something great about that whole complete form that gives you a feeling of accomplishment. It just gives you a place to train everything you want to work on.
Well, that's part of the long fist, the river, long winding river thing, right? That,
Yeah.
Tai Chi has that
Right. It embodies it
same
and
thing.
it brings that to life by following that fluid flow. It's not just a concept. It's not like be like water. It's like you physically are acting out this very long, flowing process that useful. All right. So here's the next question. It says, in Beijing, those who practice Tai Chi learned from the Yang family. Why are there differences between their forms?
Hmm.
That's a classic thing to ask your teacher. Why does yours look different from that other guy?
All right.
Like, God damn it. So Yang Qingfu answers and says, the form may, well, it's Chen Wei Ming speaking, but he's giving Yang's answer. So he says, the form may differ a little, but the principles are the same. I guess there's two reasons. Formerly, teacher-student relationship was very strict. The student didn't dare ask questions, and the teachers often didn't demonstrate. So the precise posture was hard to get. Plus, even if one got the right posture, the transmission of it over time brought changes because of the character of each practitioner was different. Therefore, if the teaching wasn't precise or if the student wasn't assiduous, then he didn't achieve the true thing. So the next question, how can one judge which form is correct? So he says we have to look at Wang Congye's classics. So yeah, that's always the answer in Tai Chi. Is like, oh, everyone's doing it differently. How do we judge which Tai Chi form is the correct one?
Well, he's saying, it's about the principles, right? So if you're
Yeah,
conforming to those principles, you're doing good Tai Chi. If you're not doing those principles, then you're not. And it doesn't
right.
really matter that much, what the outside form looks like, whether the quote unquote style, if you will.
So he says that he's like, all the principles are the important part. If your head's not suspended from above and you lean to one side, or if your chest extends out and you stand straight up, or if your upper torso is heavy and your lower torso is light, if you turn too quickly, if you're moving up and down, your shoulders wiggle, he just lists all this stuff. But he says, but if your whole body's upright and comfortable, your form will be good, even if you don't achieve perfection. So then he gives advice on leg positioning. So, experiment with narrowness and length. So here's an interesting question that comes next. I've been told that to improve, it is not necessary to practice the form a great deal, but only to practice push hands. Is this true? That's an interesting one. What if you just went only push hands? I
Mm.
would probably, actually, that might work pretty good. I mean, if you had a
Well,
good teacher.
you won't get the the health and the mind part of it. I don't think you can get that without the form. I
You
mean,
need that long form,
you could learn how to push somebody fairly well and
yeah. Yeah.
how to fight with it probably, but again, I mean, you could teach it like an external martial art. You could take each one of those 108 techniques and you could say, okay, well, here's how you use it as a fighting technique, and
Sure. They're not too
never,
different from Shaolin. They look a lot the same.
right, never mention that these were connected, but you're you'd be missing the thing that makes Tai Chi, I think.
Right.
That
And that's pretty much what he says. He says, the form is the foundation of push hands. After practicing it for a long time, you will become as heavy as a mountain and light as a feather. But if you neglect the form and only do Tui Show, eventually your body will become unstable and you can be pushed easily.
I mean, I can tell I did push hands before I did Tai Chi.
Huh.
I took a push hands class before I did any. I had done some other stuff, but I hadn't done the form, and it was like, oh yeah, you probably should learn the form because the context for how you do the pushing hands and the applications is from the form. So
Yeah.
it's more about it's a
It's
time
like,
saving
yeah.
device than it's
Well, like the form gives you the foundation, it makes you heavy, it makes you fluid, and it also has all the fighting techniques. But in between those two things is push hands.
yeah, basically.
It's funny, the first thing I learned was the Tai Chi two-person form, the 88 move form.
Mm.
Because like I was 17 or whatever, and like the idea of doing a slow form, I was just like, what the fuck? No. But I did know that there was something about internal Chinese martial arts that looked dope. So I wanted to do it. Once I learned the 88 moves, though, I was like, okay, now I want to do the form. Now I want to see the big thing, the whole thing. It got
Right.
my attention. That was pretty cool.
See, I did uh Shingy in the short form for 7 years and then started the long form in Bagua.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, you need something to hook you and get you into it. Because me and my buddy walked up and like, if it had just been a form class, we were too full of energy. Like we couldn't have done that. Like, but when we saw these crazy moves being exchanged and then the push hands and the Bagua circle walking, I was like, dude, this is just what I want to do. Like, this is perfect. And then later I came to appreciate the form, even as a young person, because I had some injuries and stuff. And once I started doing Tai Chi, I started seeing, oh, if I move my knee over my foot instead of like wobbling all over, I'll be better off. Like that'll help my knee feel better. And sure enough, yeah, it totally worked. So I became a real believer.
Yeah, I mean,
But
I think
I enjoy Shingy Bagua more though, I think.
from a health perspective, short forms and long forms, there's not much difference. You'll get healthy and from both. That the advantage of the long form is if you will the longness of it, that it requires you to keep your awareness
Yeah.
going in that thing just for so it just makes you practice longer basically, but
Yeah.
it also takes
Yeah.
you through a wider repertoire of
Yeah.
movements, which gives you a bigger sort of set and
Range of motion.
well, a bigger range of motion, but also a larger set of fighting applications.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's the basic push hands principles can be taught in the short form. Um, that will get you all the push hands stuff and some of the fighting stuff, depending on the form, right? But if you want to talk about kicks, grappling, how to deal with people who are coming at you from different angles and multiple opponents and blah 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 blah, that's all the stuff that's in the long form. So most of what you're going to get as you go through long form is just with a lot of people, it's just variations on a theme, right? You're just doing, snake creeps down is a lower version of a single whip. Repulse monkey is a backwards version of brush knee, right?
Right.
You have these movements that are, that give you more, whatever, physicality, but uh, yeah, it's really about fighting at that point because um, if you just want to do push hands and get healthy, something like the 37-24 range is plenty. You don't need to. But if you want to get the mind thing, there's something about doing it for an hour and a half that makes it a little bit different.
He says, next question. Someone said that one must still use force in Tai Chi. Is that true? The classics say when the soft reaches its limit, it becomes really strong. Tai Chi strength arises internally and is based on suppleness and relaxation. The more you practice the supple, the more quickly you will gain Nei Jin, or internal strength. If you have tension someplace, it will prevent the accumulation of internal strength. When you relax, your arms will sink easily and become heavy. Otherwise, they will float. Those people who say you must use force usually have excess strength or practice with a hard style and won't give it up. They can't believe that at the limit of suppleness lies a different quality of strength. Such people never obtain the essence of Tai Chi.
Yeah, I mean, basically the idea is if you never get to actually feel what softness is, you don't know what it is, so you can't say whether or not you're doing it.
He
So,
says the power comes at the extreme of softness, a different type. This internal strength is now
well,
it's possible or whatever.
that's how you get it. I mean, the idea is that you have to relax to let the internal power come out, right? But this is why you need to do things like push hands and standing and Neigong, because that's how you inform yourself of the things that you're not capable of doing, right? That if you just run through the form by yourself, you'll think you're the best at it there ever was because there's no test, right? And part of the thing is you got to test it. And
push against something and see what happens.
Or at least do the form in a way where if you're not doing it, you're not going to be stable, right? I mean, the simplest idea is, do you actually shift your weight 100% before you pick your foot up? Or are you somewhere in the middle and when you pick your foot up, you kind of roll your foot and there's a little bit of a weight shift, or you do some kind of back and forth, but that you have to, that there's a, you aren't all the way basically. And if you get the thing of being all the way all the time and you don't have this 60-40 thing, your form and your body change in a dramatic way. But if you never do it that way, you can say, well, the 60-40 way works just as well because you don't have the experience of doing the other one, right?
Right. The next question says this: although a teacher uses the same method of teaching, some students' postures are good while others are poor. Why is this? He says a poor student is hard and uses force. A good one must be supple without force. So I think it means without li or clumsy force, overt force.
Yeah.
So he says a goldsmith uses high temperature to melt gold so he can shape it as he wishes. An iron hammer can't shape the gold until it's first made soft. So if a teacher asks a student to use force to make his body hard, he can't expect the student postures to be good. Our force is just like iron. We must make it supple and train a long time. Then it will look soft but actually be strong. This is the internal strength of Tai Chi. So there you go. The suppleness keeps coming up as instead of hard force, you use supple force.
Well, yeah, I mean, once you get someone to feel what's actually blocked inside their body, there's usually this struggle session you have to go through because you know it's possible, you felt it, and then, but it's not there all the time. And so you're learning how to let go. And, this is the never ending part of Tai Chi is you always have something you can relax and release more, right? That after it relaxes to the point of not being tense, you can go deeper into where it's, the different layers of the energy bodies, right? So relaxing the physical body is simply just opens the door, right? Then you have the whole world of what's underneath your skin essentially. But as long as you're tense, you can't get through that door. And it's the
Right.
hard, it's the hardest part about doing this stuff
No,
because
for sure.
it's always going to block you. So the real reason why some people get it and some people don't is some people spend the time working on letting go and other people just keep trying to push through it. And I mean that I can tell you it sounds easy, but that's the whole thing, right? You run into a blockage, whatever it is, do you try to push through it and do a bigger, movement or a more intense dissolving or whatever? Or do you just kind of hang back and start to let your mind seep into that thing and, spend 5 months trying to get your body to go a half inch lower, right? That's a different approach, and that's really this water and fire thing that Bruce is always talking about
Yeah.
is, you can make it happen, or you can work to let it happen. And the second one, like you just said, it's it takes longer. Think of how a sword is forged, right? First you heat it up, it's a block of steel, you heat it up, it turns into liquid. Then you have the shape of the sword, but it's dull and dirty, and then you have to spend an enormous amount of time shaping the thing and getting an edge and all that, and then you got to sharpen it, and then you got to polish it, and that's basically what doing Tai Chi is that's that continuous, honing, sharpening, cleaning, caring for that sword. It's just the sword is your body,
And
so
all in pursuit of suppleness. And here he goes over a few other topics that are more about mechanics and stuff. But then another one I thought was funny. He says, "Do Tai Chi kicks use force?" He says, "No, they use Jin, a flexible energy, not a hard force." So that's a good question. Like, we haven't talked about kicks per se that much, but idea of Tai Chi kicking, you sort of their leg lifts and swings that
well,
should
it's
use the
like,
same type of energy as the arms,
I
right?
mean, yeah, it's a simple way of saying, or maybe not a simple way of saying, it's not a snap, right? You're not like snapping your leg when you kick
Mm.
something, that it's still using that principle of the string of pearls, where it's
Opening and closing, bending and
got to,
flexing, all that
yeah,
same
yeah,
stuff.
it's got to extend out from your body. And um there's also a thing where in Tai Chi, your kicks, first it's your hip closing, then your knee comes up, then your foot goes out, right? Gives you that sort of whipping motion. So that, again, it's the same as your arm, right? um
Yeah.
So where you're not just like picking your leg up like a stiff, thing and snapping it at somebody.
Yeah. And I mean, basically saying it should be the same way you do all the other movements. The
Yeah,
kicks shouldn't change that. But I have to admit, like getting that feeling in your legs isn't quite the same. It doesn't have, let's just say your legs, there's less stuff you can do with your legs
it's much
and they're
harder,
heavier,
much harder. Well,
right?
and
I
you have
mean,
to have the balance to do it. I think that's the real thing that
the
uh,
form's great for that, of lifting those legs one after another. And I mean, I'm thinking back to kicks. Like I've kicked people before, and I differentiate the kicks I learned in Kung Fu from the ones I learned in Xing Yi from the ones I learned in Tai Chi, sorta. But I do remember early on my one of my first sparring matches, I grabbed the guy's both his hands and I did a crescent kick, the Tai Chi outside crescent kick, the
mhm.
one where you use two
Yeah.
hands up and then wham, I kicked him right in the ribs. And like it totally worked, just like the form showed it. I was like, holy shit.
Well, because
I
part of
remember
that
being
is
stoked on that.
when you don't lean your body first, you're not telegraphing that you're about to kick. So it
True.
kind of
Comes out of
comes out of
nowhere,
nowhere.
yeah.
It's more like the Muay Thai thing where the knee comes up real fast, It's that same principle that if you were looking at me from the belly up, it's like river
Right.
dance or whatever that Irish dance thing is.
True,
From
huh?
from the belly up, I'm not moving at all. And
Right.
that leg's coming up and kicking you in the face. It's a very simple
Yeah.
technique.
That kick quality, a hard kick from anybody is going to hurt no matter what martial arts style. But I think there's a certain, it's like you mentioned
It's
the
going to
energy
hurt
gate
more if you don't see it
swings.
coming,
Like
right?
internal principles of the swings, that's the type of movement you want your leg to have with sort of that
Oh yeah,
heavy
yeah.
swooping swinging effect rather than snapping like you were saying. There's a
Like an elephant trunk.
Yeah, the elephant trunk concept.
That's the
It's
way I think of
fluid.
it.
Nothing's more supple than that. But it's heavy as fuck. If you just
Yeah,
slapped it, you've just dropped it from a height, slapped you, it would just knock you flat,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like so you get the full impact of the weight because it's loose in a way. But also you could control it pretty well because you're not just launching it like a cannon shot. There's a connectedness to it, that suppleness that allows you to change it if you have to also, or recover from a failure a little quicker too. So I'd have to say internal martial arts kicking is pretty good stuff.
Well, and in the just to bring it to the form, in the Tai Chi long form, the kicks are the kicks, but the thing that comes right after the kicks, those are the throws. So
Uh-huh.
there's this whole thing about kicks being the setup for the technique after the kick. And a
I mean, you
lot of
have to step towards them one way or the other. You might as well kick them.
right. Well, this I was literally just gonna say it's the Bagua thing of a kick is a step is a kick, right?
All right. Well, that was really interesting. I think the
All
Tao
right.
Wen is one of those
That's a
down to
good
earth
one.
books more
Yeah,
than the classics, right? Like this is more of just colloquial advice.
exactly. He's giving you practical sort of practice advice.
Moving on to the Song of the 13 Postures from Baihua's book. So this is the next statement we come to. It says, the introductory study of the 13 postures must be dictated by a teacher. There is no end to the Gong Fu. The way to progress is self-study and to complete each step without rest. So that's from the classic. And Baihua explains it by saying, the master guides the student to the door, but the learning depends on the individual. Only when the individual has the experience of striving for perfection can he or she make a great leap forward in his thoughts and concepts and be able to relatively grasp the laws of space, energy, and time. Every movement must be consistent with the concept of Tai Chi, and then one can gradually understand that the truth of all methods is unified and all methods are empty. So that's an interesting one. Some of the other ones were much longer, but this one's kind of straightforward. Basically, you need a teacher to guide you and help you get through in the door. But then once you do have the teachings, you've got to self-study and do it yourself from there. So that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I mean it's just basically, the idea that you're not going to learn this by yourself. You're not going to learn it from a book. You got to get it from a person, and they got to really give it to you, and then you got to take it, and you know, it's your job once they give you the key to the door to really do the work. And that's why the thing about it, it depends on the individual, right? That why are some people good and some people aren't? Well, it's the person, it's not necessarily the quality of instruction. I mean, if they're given the same instruction and one person gets it and one doesn't, I mean, what are you gonna say? It's like,
Right. So he mentioned some here, space, energy, and time. And that's a theme that Baihua used throughout his discussion of Neigong, Neidan, Tai Chi. He's got like this understanding of space and of energy or chi and time, which he sometimes looks at as equals MC squared, kind of the whole thing of how energy and matter are kind of the same thing at a one level or the other. But yeah, I mean, that's tough though. Like that's a much it's a deep understanding, right? To try and sort of use Tai Chi to understand how the function of the galaxy and the universe itself moves.
well, I mean, I think that it's more about the self-study aspect of it. I think that you have to the space, energy, and time is the space inside of you, the energy that's moving through you, and the time it takes to fucking get this stuff. It's like it's I mean, yeah, you can look at it in that sense, but I mean, really, it comes down to these laws are about figuring out what's inside of you, what's moving it, and then it just takes a really long time to work.
Affecting it over time, basically.
And the last part is, you when you finally um quote unquote get it, what you finally realize is it's all nothing, right? It's all emptiness. It's all about letting go. It's all about the Wu Ji, right? The letting things happens, without interference and all that, right? So the emptiness, the Wu,
Right. The
right? So
emptiness where it's not nothing is fixed and required or whatever. Everything's spontaneous and free, and your martial art is
well,
effortless.
it's after you do Jing Chi and Shen, you arrive at Wu, right? You arrive at that emptiness and that's like, in Bruce's stuff, that's your seventh body. That's your individual, who you really are, blah, blah, blah. Why am I here? All that.
Empty of all conditioning and social constructs and all the
Mm-hmm.
bullshit that we go through in life. Emptiness means being empty of all that crap.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a fullness to be had there. He says the truth of all methods is unified. So like the truth is in there. It's just it's covered up. So you need the emptiness, empty of the bullshit. You've got truth, basically.
Yeah, and I think the implied is that first you have to grasp all of the, it's the forest and the trees, right? First you have to get all the trees, then you understand the forest, right? That until you understand how all these methods are one thing, you're not going to get to that emptiness that you have to somehow figure out, the 13 postures being one unified form, if you will. That all has to happen for you to reach these, this method of comprehending Jing, as he calls it.
Quite a journey.
All right.
All right, that's it for now.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
See you soon.
Hey, folks. Thanks for listening. Just a quick reminder, check out the Patreon for the extended episode. You can go to our Instagram for images to go along with the episodes, and we have a Facebook page as well. So check that out. All right. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves and be well.